This video will show you how to assemble your automata using the previously constructed box as well as the standard parts that we made in class. So prior to starting this assembly, you want to make sure that you obviously have your box constructed and you have all the constraints and everything assembled with all the pieces of that, and make sure it's grounded so that it doesn't move. Additionally, you'll also notice that I have the axis coming here out of the holes of the side pieces. Since we're going to be inserting the axle through this direction, we'll need that central axis. So go ahead and add that to your side part of your box so that we can add the axle that way. Additionally, on each of your standard parts that you see here, you're going to need to add 1 or 2 work planes and a central axis. So before I show you how to assemble this, let's quickly just go through each one of those parts and what you need to add to get these constraints right. So on the axle and on the follower, you need 2 work planes. You need a work plane going horizontally and vertically, as well as a central axis on both the axle and the follower. The axle bushing, along with the follower guide and roller, need a single work plane going halfway through the part, and then a central axis going through the square hole, which is what you see on all 3 of those. The crank needs a work plane as shown here. So it needs to go halfway through the crank in the longest dimension, and then it needs a central axis again with the square hole. The eccentric cam also needs a work plane. This one is going to go through the center of the square hole like you see here, and then it also needs a work plane that goes halfway through the thickness of the cam. And then, as all the other previous parts, you also need a central axis going through that square hole. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video here and make sure that you get all of these work planes and the axis for each one of these parts. Okay, and once you have that done, go ahead and add all of the parts that you see here to your assembly. You're going to want an axle, follower guide, roller, 2 bushings, a crank, and a cam. And you'll also notice that I just have 1 center hole on the top. You can obviously have more if you want. That just means that you will need additional followers, rollers, and follower guides if you're going to be doing more than 1 hole. So we'll start by adding in the axle first. So we're going to go up to our constraint menu and we'll stick with mate. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be mating the central axis of the axle to the central axis of the box. So we'll click on the central axis, and then we'll click on the central axis for the box. Okay, and then click apply. And then I'm going to close out of this temporarily just so we can slide the axle all the way through. All right. And we'll just leave it there, even though we know this can move. Let's put on the bushings first, and then we will lock this in place so it doesn't move in and out like this. We do want this to be able to rotate and spin though, so that's going to be fine. So let's go ahead and add a bushing to this end first. So to do that, we're going to go constrain. Actually, let me just slide that in a little bit. So we're going to go constrain, and then we're going to click on the central axis of the bushing. And then I'm going to click on the central axis for the box. This is not the central axis for the axle. This is for the box. Okay, and then click apply. And then let me slide the axle out a little bit. Okay. What we want to constrain now is the work plane on the bushing to one of the work planes on the axle. It doesn't really matter which one you pick. So then click apply. And then the last constraint that we're going to add is a insert with the bushing into the side of the box. So we'll click on the insert, and then I'm going to click the upper part of that part right there that you can just see if I can get it again. Right there. So the upper part of the base of the bushing. And then I'm going to click on the closest part of the hole and then click apply. All right, we're going to do the same thing with the second bushing, but on the other end. So I'm going to move that over there and then flip my view around so that we can see this. All right, we're going to apply the exact same constraints. So we're going to start by adding a mate with the central axis, click apply, and then we're going to apply another mate between the work plane on the bushing as well as one of the work planes on the axle. Again, doesn't really matter which. And then click apply. And then we'll add a insert between the bushing and the box, just like we did before. And then click apply. Okay. So then I'm going to go home. And then you'll notice that our axle still goes kind of in and out. I'm going to slide it in a good bit. And then we're going to put the crank here. So I'm going to flip the view over and we're going to add a flush on the other side. So I'm going to flip back over. And then we're just going to make the end of this axle flush with the end of the bushing so it doesn't stick out like that. So we'll switch this to flush, end of the axle, end of the bushing, and click apply. All right, so we'll go home. And then again, this is the end of the axle that we're going to be adding our crank to. What you should see now is your axle as well as the bushings. So make sure this one and the other one on the other side, which you can't really see too well, the other one on the other side should turn with the axle as well, which it does. Okay, let's add on our crank next. So similar to the constraints that we've added, we're going to add a mate between the central axis on the crank and the central axis on the box. Hit apply, and then we're going to do the same thing with the work plane. So click the work plane on the crank and one of the work planes on the axle. Doesn't really matter which one. And then click apply. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add a mate between the back side of the crank. So let me flip my view around here. So we'll add a mate between this side of the crank and then the front of the bushing so that they're touching. And then click apply. All right, and that should finish the crank. So let me click home. And then if you turn the crank, that should turn the axle now, as well as the bushings. All right, so now we're going to be focused a little bit more on the top. So we're going to be adding the follower guide onto the top next. So we're going to add a constraint, and we'll do a insert next. So I'm going to click on the top part of the part that's going to be inserted for our follower guide, and then the top part of this hole, and then click apply. Now what we don't want the follower guide to do is to spin. So we want to stop it from spinning. So that means we're going to add an angle constraint between this work plane and the side of the box. I'm going to change this to directed angle. And the side of the box and set that to 0 degrees so they're parallel, and that should lock the follower guide in place. So now if we try to spin it, we won't be able to do that, which is what we want. Okay, next, let's go ahead and add our follower in the follower guide. So we'll click constrain, and similar to what we've been doing before, we'll click the axis on both, and then click apply. And then what we want to do is we want to mate the work plane on the follower guide with the work plane on the follower, and then click apply. Oh. And it looks like if you notice these are not aligned. It looks like the work plane on my follower guide is a little bit off. So I just need to correct that real quick. So I'm just going to open up my follower guide. And then if you notice, see how this doesn't go halfway through that. So I just need to change the dimension on this work plane. So I'll click edit dimension. Yeah, and that needs to actually be, follower guide hole is a little bit different. So it needs to be half of 0.215. Click OK. And save it, close out of it. And then now I'm going to try to redo that constraint again. So we'll just do a mate between the work plane on the follower guide and the work plane on the follower itself. All right, and that time it worked. So now what we should be able to do, the follower is allowed to go up and down, but it should not spin, which is exactly what's happening. So that's good. All right. A few more parts. Let's add the roller on the bottom of our follower guide next. I'm going to kind of turn the view around a little bit. The first constraint that we're going to add is just going to be the mate between the axis of each. So click on the central axis and apply that mate. Click apply. And then what we want to do is we want to add a mate between the bottom of the follower guide and the bottom of the hole in the follower. I'm going to use the free rotate tool. So if you go to free rotate, or you can press G, and I'm just going to rotate this around so that I can easily see inside that hole for this next constraint. So I'm going to click the constraint menu, and we do want to do a mate between, again, the bottom of the hole and the bottom of the follower guide. And then click apply. All right. And then you'll notice now that the follower spins, and we want to stop that next. So the way that we stop that, I'm going to have to rotate this around a little bit first, is we basically just want to mate the work plane on the roller with this same horizontal work plane on our follower. So we'll click the work plane on the roller first, and then you want to click the horizontal roller that you see, or the horizontal work plane on the follower that you see right there. And then click apply. All right, and now that roller should be stuck, and it does. It moves exactly with it. All right, which is what we want. All right, so we have just one more part to add, which is our cam. And then the first thing we're going to add with our cam is, again, we'll do a mate with the central axis. So I'll click the axis on the cam and the axis here. Click apply. All right, and then for this next part, I'm just going to slide it over to about where it needs to be. So that's about right. What we want to do next is add a constraint between the work plane that is going this direction. So let me get my constraint menu open. So I'm going to add a work plane, or a constraint between this work plane and then the work plane on the axle that is the same direction, which is a little hard to see. This one right here. Click apply. All right, and now when you rotate your axle, you should notice the cam should rotate with it. Okay. All right, so now we've got to get our cam positioned exactly right with our roller, and to do that, we're going to use this work plane that you can see right here. So let me just change the view a little bit. So we're going to add another mate between this work plane and then the work plane that you can kind of just barely see right here on our follower to get them lined up perfectly. So again, this will be another mate. So we'll click this work plane and then the work plane that you can see right there with our follower, and then click apply. And that did kind of flip the cam so that it was faced the other way, and that's okay. It doesn't really matter which way it's faced. All right, so everything is aligned. The cam, notice you can't move that side to side along the axle anymore. We have one final constraint to add, which is a transitional, which is what's going to constrain the bottom of the roller to the surface of the cam, so that basically as we rotate this axle, the roller is basically acting as gravity would to stay on the cam, and then the cam will be pushing the roller and the follower up. So we'll click constrain, and then we'll go to transitional, and then you want to click the curved bottom surface of the roller and then the curved surface of the eccentric cam. And you'll notice that they are now touching. Then click apply. And then now when you rotate your crank, you will notice that the roller and the follower move up and down. All right, now go ahead and go to home so we can see the entire thing. All right, so this is what you should have completed by the end of your assembly. All right, good luck.